I checked my gear for the third time in 10 minutes, which was probably 2 times too many, but I couldn't help myself. The oxygen regulator, the pressure gauges, the emergency ascent system, everything looked perfect. Everything always looked perfect before a dive. That was the whole point. "You're gonna wear out the dials if you keep staring at them like that," Russell said, adjusting his own equipment with the kind of casual confidence that made me feel ancient at 34. He had this way of making everything seem like no big deal, even when we were about to drop 1,400 feet into the kind of darkness that could swallow you whole. "Just being thorough," I muttered, but my hands kept moving anyway, checking the backup air supply, testing the communication system one more time. The familiar weight of my diving suit should have been comforting. I'd worn gear like this thousands of times, but today it felt wrong somehow. Too heavy, too tight around my chest. Russell grinned and ran his fingers through that messy red hair of his. "Come on, Emma. Just a pipeline repair. We've done this dance before." Yeah, we had. But not here. Never here. I looked out across the deck of the support vessel, watching the crew prep the diving bell that would take us down. The Pacific stretched endlessly in every direction, gray-green water that looked deceptively calm from up here. Somewhere far below us, a damaged section of pipeline waited for our attention. Routine maintenance, according to the work order. Replace some corroded joints, check the pressure seals, document any structural issues. Standard stuff that paid well and kept the lights on. So why did my stomach feel like I'd eaten a handful of broken glass? "Fernandez, Weaver, let's go over this one more time." Dalton Pina's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts like a blade. Our operations manager stood near the diving bell, clipboard in hand, looking every inch the former military man he was. Everything about Dalton screamed precision, from his perfectly pressed company shirt to the way he held himself like he was still standing at attention. Russell and I gathered around him, along with Emily Lee, our marine biologist. Emily held her tablet tight against her chest and kept checking the sonar readings on the nearby monitor. She'd been doing that all morning, making faces at the screen like it had insulted her personally. "The target site is at coordinates 34.2156 north, 119.8945 west," Dalton read from his clipboard. "Depth of 1,400 feet. Water temperature 42 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll have approximately 3 hours of bottom time before decompression requirements become critical." I nodded along, but something bothered me about those coordinates. I'd worked this general area before, but never that exact spot. When I'd asked about it during the briefing yesterday, Dalton had brushed off my questions with some vague explanation about new pipeline extensions and classified infrastructure details. "The damaged section is approximately 50 meters long," he continued. "Primary concern is corrosion around the main joints. Emily's preliminary survey indicates standard repair protocols should be sufficient." Emily looked up from her tablet, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Actually, I've been getting some weird readings from the area. The sonar data shows some odd stuff in the seafloor makeup, and there are these strange sound patterns that—" "Equipment glitches," Dalton interrupted smoothly. "We've been having issues with the new sonar array. Nothing that affects the dive parameters." But Emily's expression grew more troubled. "I really think we should investigate these readings further before—" "The readings are irrelevant to the repair work," Dalton said, his tone carrying the kind of finality that shut down arguments. "We're on a tight schedule here. The pipeline needs to be operational by tomorrow." I wanted to ask more about those sonar readings, but something in Dalton's look warned me off. He had this way of staring at you when he didn't want questions, like you were bothering him with stuff that didn't matter. Russell, bless him, jumped into the quiet with one of his usual jokes. "Hey, As long as there aren't any sea monsters down there, I'm good. Though if we do run into Godzilla, I'm using Emma as a human shield." "You wish," I shot back, grateful for the momentary lightness. "I'd leave you behind so fast you'd think you were standing still." Russell laughed, but I caught him checking his own equipment again when he thought I wasn't looking. For all his joking around, he took the safety protocols seriously. More seriously than he let on, anyway. The diving bell sat on its launch platform like a metal egg, all shining steel and reinforced glass. Our home for the next few hours, assuming everything went according to plan. I'd made this trip hundreds of times before, but today the bell looked different somehow. Smaller, more breakable. "Weather conditions are optimal," Dalton continued. "Surface winds at 8 knots, wave height under 3 feet. You'll have perfect conditions for the descent." Perfect conditions. Right. So why did I feel like we were walking into a trap? Emily was still staring at her tablet, scrolling through data that apparently showed irregularities she couldn't explain. "The acoustic patterns are really weird," she murmured, more to herself than to us. "I've never seen readings quite like this." "What kind of patterns?" I asked, stepping closer to look at her screen. She tilted the tablet toward me, showing a display covered in wavy lines and color-coded depth measurements. "See these spikes here? They're coming from the seafloor near your target coordinates. Almost like there's something down there that's moving. Active how? I'm not sure. The signatures don't match any known geological activity and they're too regular to be random. It's almost like equipment malfunction." Dalton cut in again, reaching over to close Emily's tablet. "Which is exactly what it is. We've already run diagnostics on the sonar array twice this week." Emily looked like she wanted to argue, but Dalton's expression didn't leave room for discussion. She gripped her tablet tighter and stepped back, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. Russell was watching this exchange with the kind of careful attention he usually saved for equipment checks. "So, we're definitely sure there's nothing strange down there?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. "Because strange and 1,400 feet don't really mix well in my experience." "Nothing weird," Dalton confirmed. "Standard pipeline repair in standard conditions. You'll be down and back up before lunch." But as he said it, I caught him looking toward Emily's tablet like he was worried about what else she might have discovered. The whole thing felt practiced somehow, like they'd rehearsed this conversation before. The crew wrapped up their final checks on the diving bell, and Dalton waved toward the platform. "Time to gear up. Remember, this is a simple repair job. Get in, fix the pipeline, document everything, and get out. No extra exploration, no going off the planned route." That last bit felt like a direct warning, like he was telling us to keep our curiosity in check, which naturally just made me want to poke around even more. Russell and I climbed into the diving bell, settling into the cramped seats surrounded by life support equipment and communication gear. The usual routine of pre-dive checks should have been reassuring, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling as I tested the radio connection. "Surface control, this is diving bell. Communication check." "Copy, diving bell. We have you loud and clear." Dalton's voice came through the speakers with perfect clarity. Russell leaned over to adjust his headset. "Hey Dalton, just to confirm, we're looking at standard pipeline construction down there, right? Nothing unusual about the site?" A pause, just a fraction of a second too long. "Standard construction, standard repair protocols. You've both done this job dozens of times." But we hadn't done this job. Not at this location. Not with these coordinates that nobody wanted to explain. The diving bell swayed as the crane lifted us off the platform. Through the small porthole, I watched the ship's deck drop away below us, Then the ocean surface rushing up to meet us. The usual feeling of going underwater swept over the bell as we broke through the waves and started down into the dark blue depths. Russell was strangely quiet as we dropped through the water, watching the depth gauge numbers climb. Usually he'd be telling jokes or sharing stories to pass the time, but today he just stared out the porthole like he was searching for something. "You okay?" I asked. He glanced at me, then back at the porthole. "Yeah, just... the water looks different today. Murkier than usual for this depth." I pressed my face against the glass and saw what he meant. The water around us had a cloudy quality that shouldn't exist this far from shore. At 1,400 feet, we should be dropping through crystal clear, deep ocean water, but instead we were surrounded by a thick haze that seemed to swallow our lights. "Probably just stirred up sediment," I said, but I didn't believe it. Sediment didn't behave like this. "Surface control, we're seeing unusual water clarity on descent," I reported through the radio. "Visibility is significantly reduced." "Copy that. Probably temporary conditions from recent storm activity. Shouldn't affect your work once you reach the bottom." But there hadn't been any storms in the past week. I checked the weather reports myself. The depth gauge showed 800 feet and climbing, or dropping, depending on how you looked at it. Around us, the water grew darker and thicker, like we were sinking through liquid smoke. Our external lights barely cut more than a few feet in any direction. Russell moved uncomfortably in his seat. "Emma, I've got to ask, have you ever worked this specific site before?" "No. You?" "Nope. And I've been diving for Ocean Tech for 3 years. I thought I'd seen all their regular pipeline locations. That made 2 of us. In my 8 years with the company, I'd worked pipeline repairs all along the California coast, but never at these coordinates. When I tried to look up previous work orders for this location, the files had been marked as classified or restricted access." "Maybe it's a new section," I suggested. But even as I said it, I knew that didn't make sense. New pipeline construction required months of environmental impact studies and regulatory approval. There would have been paperwork, permits, public notices, none of which I'd seen for this location. The depth gauge hit 1,200 feet. We were getting close now, dropping through water so murky it looked like we were descending through chocolate milk. Our lights made a small bubble of visibility around the diving bell, but beyond that was nothing but thick darkness. "Surface control. Visibility is extremely poor down here," I reported. "We're going to need extra time to locate the target site." "Understood. The pipeline should be clearly visible once you reach bottom depth. Proceed as planned." But how could they be so sure? If the water was this cloudy, how did they know what we'd be able to see? Russell was gripping his seat restraints way too tight, his knuckles white against the straps. "Emma, I've got a really bad feeling about this." "Yeah," I admitted. "Me too." The depth gauge showed 1,300 feet. Almost there. Around us, the dark water seemed to push against the porthole like it wanted to get inside. I caught myself holding my breath, even though the diving bell had its own air supply. 1,400 feet. Bottom depth. The diving bell touched down on the seafloor with a soft thud, and our external lights lit up a small patch of sandy bottom. Past that patch, the black water swallowed everything. "Surface control, we've reached bottom depth. Beginning exit procedures." "Copy. Remember, standard repair protocols only. No unnecessary exploration." There it was again, that warning against curiosity, like they were afraid of what we might discover if we dug too deep. Russell and I ran through our final equipment checks, getting ready to leave the relative safety of the diving bell for the crushing darkness outside. My worry had turned into a cold knot in my stomach, but I pushed it down. I was a professional. I'd done this job hundreds of times, just never here, never in water this weird, never with a support team that seemed more focused on restricting our movements than keeping us safe. "Ready?" Russell asked, his hand on the exit hatch controls. I took a deep breath and checked my equipment one last time. "Ready." But as the hatch opened and the ocean rushed in to balance the pressure, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to find out why this location had been kept secret, and why Emily's sonar readings had shown something alive moving around down here in the darkness. 20 minutes into our bottom time, the seafloor stretched out like a moonscape in every direction. Sand and silt, broken only by the dark line of the pipeline snaking away into the murky distance. Russell had his welding equipment spread out in a neat semicircle, checking connections with the kind of careful attention that made me feel better about being down here. "Visibility's still garbage," he muttered through the comm, adjusting his underwater torch. "I can barely see 10 feet in any direction." I swept my own light across the pipeline, looking for the damaged section we were supposed to repair. The metal looked newer than I'd expected, not the corroded, decades-old infrastructure I'd been picturing. Yeah, this water shouldn't be this murky at depth. Something's stirring up the sediment. Maybe there's current we weren't told about. Russell moved along the pipeline, his light dancing across the joints and seals. Though the water feels pretty still to me. That's what bothered me most. No current, no temperature changes, nothing that would explain why we were swimming through what looked like underwater fog. I'd worked in cloudy water before, but this felt different. Wrong. I was checking a pressure gauge when something caught my eye about 30 feet ahead. A break in the pipeline's smooth curve, like something was poking out from one of the joints. "Russell, you seeing this?" I swam toward the anomaly, my light cutting through the haze. "Seeing what?" He looked up from his equipment, then followed my light beam. "Oh, yeah, there's definitely something there." As I got closer, the shape became clearer, and my stomach dropped. Jesus Christ. The words slipped out before I could stop them. It was a leg. A human leg in a diving suit, sticking out from a crack in the pipeline like someone had been pushed inside and got stuck halfway. Russell swam up beside me, his breathing suddenly loud and fast through the comm. "Emma, tell me that's not what I think it is." I moved my light along the pipeline, tracing the outline of the body. Most of it was jammed inside the pipe, but I could see enough to know we were looking at a person, or what was left of one. "Surface control, this is Emma." I tried to keep my voice steady. "We've got a situation down here." "Go ahead." Dalton's voice crackled through the speaker. "We found human remains at the pipeline site. Looks like someone got trapped inside the pipe structure." A pause. Way too long. "Can you describe what you're seeing?" I swam closer, fighting every instinct that told me to stay away. The diving suit looked intact, but when I angled my light to see inside the helmet visor, my breath caught. The head was completely destroyed, crushed flat like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. But the suit itself showed no signs of damage, no tears or punctures that would explain how the pressure had gotten inside. "The body's wearing a diving suit," I reported. "Looks recent, not old, but the head is. It's been crushed, completely destroyed." Russell had moved around to the other side, his light showing more of the scene. "Emma, look at this." The suit had a logo I knew, Ocean Tech Industries, our company. "Surface control, the victim is wearing our equipment. Company diving suit with current safety certifications." Another pause. When Dalton's voice came back, it carried a tone I'd never heard from him before. Cold, almost irritated. Negative on human remains. You're looking at debris, possibly marine growth or discarded equipment. No personnel are missing from our operations. I stared at the body jammed in the pipeline. The arms, the torso, the legs, definitely human, all wearing a diving suit that probably cost more than my car. Dalton, I'm looking right at it. This is definitely a person. Fernandez, you're at 1,400 feet in poor visibility conditions. Nitrogen narcosis can cause visual distortions and false pattern recognition. What you're seeing is not human remains. Russell's voice crackled through the comm, strained and tense. Sir, we're both looking at the same thing. There's a body here. Weaver, check your depth gauge and gas mixture readings. You're both experiencing pressure-related hallucinations. Continue with the repair work as planned. I wanted to argue, but something in Dalton's voice stopped me cold. This wasn't confusion or a misunderstanding. He was cutting us off on purpose. Copy that, I said finally, but I kept my light trained on the body. Russell swam closer to me, close enough that I could see his eyes through his helmet visor. They were wide and terrified. Emma, that's not debris, he whispered, probably hoping the surface team couldn't hear him clearly. I know. I moved my light along the diving suit, searching for ID numbers or name tags. The equipment looked new, maybe 6 months old at most, the kind of expensive gear that only got handed out to experienced divers on important jobs. Look at the suit integrity, I murmured to Russell. No tears, no punctures. The pressure seals are all intact. So how did the head get crushed? That was the question that made my skin crawl. At this depth, any breach in the suit would cause instant death from pressure differential. But this person's suit was perfect. As if they'd been killed by something else entirely, then stuffed into the pipeline. Surface control, requesting permission to document the scene before proceeding with repairs. Negative. Continue with scheduled maintenance. Do not waste time investigating debris. Debris. Right. Russell had gone back to his welding equipment, but I could see him looking toward the body every few seconds. His hand shook as he attached the torch assembly. I swam around the pipeline, trying to get a better view of how the body had ended up inside the structure. The opening was barely wide enough for a person, and the edges showed scrape marks like something had been pushed through with serious force. Emma? Russell's voice was barely a whisper. The serial numbers on that suit. I think I recognize them. From where? Equipment checkout logs. I'm pretty sure that gear was issued to Marcus Chen about 6 months ago. Marcus Chen. I remembered him. Experienced diver, good reputation. Worked for us for about 3 years. Then one day he just stopped coming in. Dalton had mentioned something about him leaving to take a job with a company in Texas. Marcus moved to Houston, I said. But even as I said it, I felt doubt creeping in. Did he? Or did someone just tell us he moved to Houston? The question floated between us in the water like poison. I thought about all the divers I'd known over the years who had supposedly quit or transferred or moved away. How many of them had I actually heard from after they left? Fernandez, Weaver, status report. Dalton's voice cut through my thoughts. Beginning repair sequence. Russell answered, but his voice sounded hollow. I took one more look at the body in the pipeline, the crushed head, the intact suit, the company logo shining under my light. Everything about this was wrong, but Dalton clearly didn't want us asking questions. Surface control. What's the history on this pipeline section? I asked. When was it installed? That information is classified. Focus on the repair work. Classified. A pipeline repair job with classified background information. Russell had fired up his welding torch, the bright flame making a small bubble of light in the murky water. But I noticed he kept positioning himself so he could see the body out of the corner of his eye, like he was afraid it might suddenly move. "Emma," he said quietly, "I've got a really bad feeling we're not the first team to work this site." I looked around at the empty seafloor, the weird, cloudy water, the pipeline that looked newer than it should be, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a horrible thought started taking shape. What if this wasn't a repair job at all? What if we were here for the same reason Marcus Chen had been here 6 months ago? And what if Marcus Chen had never made it back to the surface? The voice crackled through our headsets like a whisper from hell. "Emma. Russell. Emma. Russell." I froze, my hand gripping the pipeline so hard I could feel the metal through my thick gloves. The voice was distorted, like it was traveling through water and static. But it was definitely human, definitely saying our names. Russell's head snapped up, his light beam cutting wild arcs through the murky water. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah." My throat felt tight. Surface control. We're picking up an unknown voice on our communication channel. "Negative," Dalton's voice came back immediately. "Your channel is clear. No other transmissions detected." But the voice came again, clearer this time. "Emma. Russell. Can you hear me?" Russell was already reaching for his radio controls. "Dalton. Someone's talking to us down here for sure. Male voice. Knows our names. Weaver, your communication system is functioning normally. No external signals are being received." I looked at Russell through his helmet visor. His eyes were wide, scared. We were both hearing the same thing, but somehow the surface team wasn't picking it up. "Emma. Russell. Please." The voice grew stronger, more demanding. Not clearer exactly, but more there somehow. Like whoever was speaking was moving closer to us. Russell started checking his gear again, that nervous habit of his, going crazy. His hands moved frantically over his air gauges, his emergency systems, his backup communications. "This is seriously messed up, Emma. How is someone talking to us down here?" "I don't know. But I had a terrible suspicion I didn't want a voice." The voice came again, and this time there was something desperate in it. "Help. Please help." I found myself looking back toward the body wedged in the pipeline. The crushed head, the intact diving suit, the company logo shining under our lights. Something about the voice's tone was familiar, though I couldn't place it. "Surface control, we need clarification on communication protocols," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are there any other teams operating in this area?" "Negative. You are the only personnel at depth. Continue with repair procedures." But the voice kept coming through our headsets, getting more desperate with each message. "Emma. Russell. Don't leave. Please don't leave." Russell was turning in slow circles now, his light sweeping the ocean floor around us. "Where is it coming from?" "There's nobody else down here." That was the thing that made my skin crawl. The voice wasn't coming through our standard communication frequency. I'd been diving long enough to know what radio chatter sounded like, what surface communications felt like through the water. This was something else entirely. "Help us. Please help us. Us." The voice had said us. I swam closer to Russell, close enough that I could see the panic building in his eyes. "Russell, listen to me. Check your communication settings. What frequency are we on?" His hands shook as he adjusted his radio controls. "Standard company frequency, same as always." "But Emma, this voice isn't coming through the radio." "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's not coming through the speakers. It's just there, in my head." like someone's talking directly into my helmet. Ice ran through my body because he was right. The voice wasn't coming through our communication system at all. It was just there, like sound traveling through the water itself. Emma. Russell. I know you can hear me. The voice knew details it shouldn't know. Our names, obviously, but there was something else. Something about the way it spoke that suggested it was familiar with our equipment, our procedures. Surface control, requesting immediate clarification on dive site history, I said. Have there been any previous incidents at this location? Fernandez, focus on the repair work. Site history is classified. Classified again. Everything about this job was classified. Russell had stopped spinning and was staring at the body in the pipeline. Emma, what if that voice is coming from... Don't. I cut him off before he could finish the thought. But I was thinking the same thing. The voice came again, clearer than before. The water. The water changed us. But we're still here. Changed us, not changed me. Us. I looked around the muddy ocean floor, at the weird, cloudy water that shouldn't exist at this depth, at the pipeline that looked newer than it should. How many other bodies were down here? How many other divers had been sent to this spot for routine maintenance? Please, don't let them send more. Russell grabbed my arm, squeezing hard enough that I felt it through both our suits. Emma, we need to get out of here. Right now. But the voice kept talking, and now I heard something else underneath it. Other voices, quieter, but definitely there. Multiple people speaking at once, all begging for help. The suits, they keep us alive, but we can't leave. Can't surface. I thought about Marcus Chen, the diver whose gear Russell had spotted. The guy who'd supposedly quit and moved to Texas. What if he'd never left at all? What if he was still down here, stuck somehow in the crushing darkness? Surface control. We're experiencing equipment malfunctions, I lied. Requesting immediate ascent for safety check. Negative. Complete the repair sequence first. You have adequate bottom time remaining. The voice in our helmets grew more urgent. Don't trust them. They know. They've always known. Russell was hyperventilating now, his breathing loud and fast through the communication system. Emma, I can't do this. We have to go up. We have to go up right now. But as I looked at the body in the pipeline, at the intact diving suit with the crushed head, I realized something that made my blood turn to ice. The voice wasn't just familiar because I'd heard it before. It was familiar because I'd worked with whoever it belonged to. Marcus? I whispered. The voice stopped. Total quiet for several seconds. Then softer than before. Emma, you remember? Russell stared at me through his helmet visor. Marcus Chen? But he moved to Houston. No, the voice said, and now I could hear the pain in it. I never left. None of us ever left. The murky water around us seemed to press closer, and I realized we weren't alone down here. We'd never been alone. The body moved. Not a twitch or a shift from water current. The corpse wedged in the pipeline actually turned its crushed head toward us. The helmet rotated with a grinding sound I could hear through the water, and suddenly those desperate voices weren't coming from somewhere else anymore. They were coming from right there, from that mangled thing that should have been dead. Oh God, oh God, oh God. Russell was backing away so fast he nearly wrapped his air hose around his own legs. Emma, it's moving. The dead guy is moving. I should have been swimming away too. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get the hell out of there, but instead, I found myself drifting closer. My light trained on the sight in front of me. The body's movements were all wrong, jerky and mechanical, like a marionette being operated by someone who'd never seen a human walk. But it was definitely intentional. The thing was pulling itself out of the pipeline opening, using its arms to drag the rest of its body free. "Emma, Russell." The voice was clearer now, coming directly from the helmet speaker. "Please, help me." "Surface control, we have a situation," I managed to say, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. "The body we found it's moving. It's alive." Dalton's response was immediate and sharp. "Fernandez, surface immediately. Both of you, emergency ascent protocols now." "But Dalton, this person needs help." "That's an order. You're experiencing nitrogen narcosis. Get to the surface before you make a fatal mistake." Russell was already swimming toward our diving bell, but I couldn't move. The corpse had pulled itself completely free now and was reaching toward me with one gloved hand. The diving suit looked intact, except for the helmet, where I could see the crushed remains of what had once been a human head. Emily's voice came through the communication channel, clinical and detached. "Emma, nitrogen narcosis typically begins affecting judgment at depths below 100 feet. At 1,400 feet, visual and auditory hallucinations are common, especially under stress conditions." "This isn't a hallucination," I said, but even as I spoke, doubt crept in. Could I be losing my mind down here? The moving corpse reached toward me and I spotted the serial numbers printed on the suit's sleeve. Ice shot through my veins. "Russell, look at the equipment numbers." He'd stopped backing away and was floating about 20 feet off, his light beam shaking as his hands trembled. "What about them?" "Read them to me." "OT 4471B, why?" I knew those numbers. I'd seen them in the equipment checkout logs just 6 months ago, written next to a name I recognized in neat handwriting. "That's Marcus Chen's gear." Russell's breathing got faster through the comm. "But Marcus moved to Houston. He quit to take that job with the offshore drilling company." The corpse, Marcus, was still reaching for us, its movements becoming more coordinated, as if it was remembering how to use its body. "Marcus," I called out. The helmet turned toward me, and the voice that came through was definitely his, though warped by whatever had happened to his head. "Emma, you remember me?" "Surface control, this is Marcus Chen," I said into my radio. "He's alive down here. We need immediate medical evacuation." The silence stretched on way too long. When Dalton finally spoke up, his voice had something in it I'd never heard before, not just that usual commanding tone, but something that almost sounded like panic. "There is no Marcus Chen at your location. Marcus Chen transferred to Houston 6 months ago. You are experiencing severe nitrogen narcosis and need to surface immediately." But Marcus was right there, coming toward us with those jerky, unnatural movements. His diving suit had our company logo, our equipment serial numbers, our safety certifications. "Emma," Russell's voice was tight with fear. "If Marcus never left, if he's been down here for 6 months, what happened to him? And why did they tell us he quit?" That was the question that made everything click into place. The classified dive site, the murky water that shouldn't exist, Emily's strange sonar readings that Dalton had brushed off, the pipeline that looked newer than it should. Marcus reached us, his gloved hand touching my helmet. Through the water, I could hear him clearly now. Not through the radio, but somehow directly. "They sent me down here for routine maintenance too," he said. "Just like you. But something's wrong with this place, Emma. The water, it changes things. I died, but I'm still here, still conscious, still trapped." Russell was hyperventilating now. "Emma, we need to go. Right now." But I couldn't stop staring at Marcus, at the unreal sight of his crushed head and his intact suit and his desperate pleading voice. "How many others?" I asked him. "So many. We're all still here, Emma. All the divers they sent down over the years. We can't leave, can't surface, but we can't really die either." The radio crackled with Dalton's voice, more urgent now. "Fernandez, Weaver, emergency ascent immediately. That is a direct order." Marcus's helmet turned toward the surface, then back to me. "Don't trust them. They know what this place does. They've always known." The three figures moved through the water like they belonged there. That was the first thing that struck me, not their jerky movements or their old diving suits, but how at ease they seemed down here. 1,400 feet of crushing pressure, and they swam through the dark water like they were taking a casual walk through their neighborhood. "Emma," Russell's voice cracked through the comm. "Tell me you're seeing this too." "I see them." My hands found the emergency ascent controls on my belt, but I forced myself not to touch them. Rapid ascent from this depth would kill us just as dead as whatever was swimming toward us. The closest figure wore a diving suit I recognized from old training manuals, the kind they used in the 80s, bulky and primitive compared to our current gear. But the suit looked brand new, like it had just come out of storage. The diver inside moved with that same mechanical precision as Marcus, arms and legs working in perfect coordination. Russell was backing toward our diving bell, his movements slow and careful. "The one on the left, check out the company logo." I turned my light toward the figure he pointed out. The patch on the suit's chest made my stomach drop. Deepwater Solutions, Inc. I knew that company. They'd gone under 15 years ago after a string of diving accidents that destroyed them. "That's impossible," I whispered. But the proof was right there in front of me, swimming through water that should have crushed any human body into paste. The third figure wore gear I didn't recognize at all, older than the others, with a design that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Surface control," I tried again, but my radio only produced static, mixed with voices I couldn't quite make out. The whispers seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, like the water itself was talking. Russell grabbed his emergency beacon, the bright yellow device that would signal our location to the surface team, but when he turned it on, nothing happened. The light that should have started flashing stayed dark. "Equipment failure," he said, but his voice carried no conviction. We both knew our gear had been working perfectly 20 minutes ago. The three figures had spread out around us now, maybe 30 feet away, close enough that I could see details through their helmet visors, though what I saw didn't make sense. Faces that looked human but wrong somehow, like they'd been underwater too long. Marcus was still with us too, floating just outside the group. 4 changed divers total, all watching us with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. "They're not attacking," Russell observed, and he was right. The figures maintained their distance, moving in slow circles around us but never getting closer. "Maybe they don't want to hurt us," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Then what do they want?" Before I could answer, the voices in our headsets got clearer. Not Marcus this time, but several people talking at once, their words jumbling together until I could barely make out what they were saying. "Help us. Trapped here. Can't leave. So long." Russell grabbed my arm, squeezing hard enough that I felt it through both our suits. "Emma, we need to move. Now." But as we started swimming toward the diving bell, the figures moved too. Not to block us exactly, but to keep their positions around us, like they were pushing us somewhere. "Wait." I stopped swimming and held up my hand. "Look at how they're positioned." Russell followed where I was looking, and I watched him figure it out through his helmet visor. The four shapes weren't just randomly placed around us. They were positioned in a careful pattern, with openings that pointed in only one direction, further into the dark water, away from our diving bell. "They want us to follow them," Russell said. The voices in our headsets got louder, more desperate. "Come with us. See the truth. Understand what happened." I glanced back at our diving bell, then at the figures standing there, waiting for us to choose. Everything in me yelled to get back to the surface, to escape this whole mess. But there was another part of me, the part that had been wondering about this dive site since we got here, that needed to know what they were trying to show us. "Emma, no." Russell read my expression perfectly. "Whatever you're thinking, the answer is no." But the figure in the old diving suit had started moving, swimming slowly away from us towards something I couldn't make out in the murky distance. The others followed, staying in formation but clearly expecting us to come with them. Marcus lingered for a moment, his crushed helmet turning toward me one last time. "Please, Emma, you need to see. You need to understand what they've been doing down here." Then he swam after the others, leaving Russell and me alone on the empty seafloor. "We're going back to the bell," Russell said firmly. "Right now." But as we turned toward our escape route, I saw something that made my blood freeze. More lights in the distance, moving through the water toward us. Not the steady beams of our equipment, but the flickering, uncertain glow of old diving lights. More of them were coming. The figures moved like they'd been waiting for this moment their entire underwater existence. Russell and I had maybe 20 feet to cover before we reached the diving bell, but they closed the distance in seconds. Not swimming exactly, more like they were being dragged through the water by invisible currents that only worked for them. "Emma, they're too fast." Russell's voice cracked through the comm, and I could hear his breathing getting ragged with panic. I pushed harder, my fins churning through the murky water, but it felt like trying to outrun a car while walking through mud. The figures moved with this horrible efficiency, like they'd done this before, many times. Russell screamed. Not the kind of yell you make when you're scared. This was pure terror, the sound someone makes when they realize they're about to die. I spun around and saw two of the figures had grabbed him, one on each arm. Their gloved hands locked around his equipment harness. "Let him go." I started swimming back toward them, but Russell's voice stopped me cold. "No. Emma, get to the bell. Get out of here." The figures weren't trying to hurt him at first. They were studying his equipment with this clinical precision, their helmeted heads tilted like they were examining every piece of his gear. One of them reached for his primary air hose with movements that were too deliberate, too practiced. They knew exactly what they were doing. "Surface control. Emergency ascent," I screamed into my radio, but got nothing back except static mixed with those whispered voices. "Russell's in trouble. We need immediate—" The first figure ripped Russell's air hose away from his regulator. The noise traveled through the water, a sharp hiss as his breathing gas rushed into the ocean. Russell's hands shot to his throat, his body jerking as he tried to grab his emergency backup system. But the second figure was already there, calmly cutting off his backup air supply with the same terrible precision. "Emma." Russell's voice was getting weaker through the comm. "Can't breathe." I was swimming toward them as hard as I could, but the water felt thick as concrete. The figures worked on Russell like mechanics taking apart an engine, each movement precise and purposeful. They weren't angry or violent. They were just doing a job. The third figure appeared behind Russell and began tearing at his diving suit. Not random slashing, but targeted cuts at specific pressure points. The suit's integrity alarms started screaming through our communication channel, a high-pitched wail that meant his protection was failing. "Stop it!" I reached them just as Russell's suit breached in 3 places at once. The crushing pressure hit him instantly. At 1,400 feet, water doesn't just rush in. It explodes through any opening with the force of a sledgehammer. Russell's body went rigid, then limp, as the ocean invaded his suit and crushed his lungs. But the figures didn't stop there. They kept dragging at him, ripping his equipment apart piece by piece, while his body drifted between them like a broken doll. His helmet came loose with a grinding sound, and I caught a glimpse of his face. Eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. "Russell!" I grabbed for him, but one of the figures turned toward me with that same mechanical precision. Through its helmet visor, I saw what had once been a human face. The features were still there, but wrong somehow, as if they'd been underwater so long they'd started to change into something else. "Join us!" The voice came from all of them at once, not through the radio but directly through the water. "Stay with us. Help us." Russell's body drifted freely now, his diving suit torn apart around him, but as I watched in terror, the figures started placing the pieces in a deliberate pattern, like they were getting ready for something. "Don't go," they pleaded, their voices overlapping until it sounded like a chorus. "Come back. Help us." I forced myself to turn away and swim for the diving bell. Every stroke felt like betrayal, leaving Russell behind with those things. But staying would just give them another victim. The bell's hatch was still open, thank God. I pulled myself inside and slammed it shut, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the controls. The emergency ascent system kicked on with a mechanical whir, and I felt the bell start to rise. Through the porthole, I could see them watching me go. 4 figures now, standing in a circle around something on the seafloor. Russell's gear, arranged in a pattern I didn't want to understand. "Don't leave us." Their voices followed me up through the water, growing fainter but never quite disappearing. "Please don't leave us alone." The diving bell rose toward the surface, pulling me away from the horror below. But I could still hear them calling, their voices blending with the static in my headset, until I couldn't tell where the radio ended and the ocean began. Russell was gone. And somehow I knew he wasn't really dead. Not the way death was supposed to work. He was going to join them down there in the crushing darkness, awake and desperate and trapped forever. Just like Marcus Chen. Just like everyone else who'd come before. The tapping started soft, like someone knocking politely on a door. I was hunched over the diving bell's controls, trying to coax more speed out of the ascent system, when the first metallic tap bounced through the hull. My hands froze on the emergency controls. Tap, tap, tap. Steady, purposeful, coming from outside. No way. I pressed my face against the porthole, peering into the murky water rushing past us. No fucking way. But there it was, a figure clinging to the outside of the bell, like some nightmare hitchhiker. One of them had followed me up, its gloved hands gripping the hull's maintenance rails, while its body streamed behind us in the current. The tapping continued. 1 tap, pause, then another. I counted along without meaning to, and the pattern hit me like ice water. 1,000 feet. We'd climbed from 1,400 to 1,300, and the thing was counting down the pressure levels. It knew exactly how deep we were. "Surface control. Emergency ascent in progress." I screamed into my radio, but got nothing back except that same static mixed with whispered voices. The communication system was completely shot, leaving me alone in a metal can with something that shouldn't exist, hanging onto the outside. Tap, tap. 1,200 feet. I could see more details now through the porthole. The diving suit looked very old, older than the others I'd seen on the seafloor. The fabric was covered in what looked like algae or some kind of growth, dark patches that swayed slightly in the water flow. But the suit held together perfectly. No tears or breaches, even though the crushing pressure should have flattened it like a tin can. Tap. 1,100 feet. The figure's helmet turned toward the porthole, and I jerked back without thinking. Through the visor, I caught a glimpse of what might have been a face, but the glass was too fogged and the growth too thick to make out any details. Just the hint of eyes watching me. My hands found the emergency beacon controls, but when I activated them, the lights stayed dark. Just like Russell's beacon. Whatever was happening down there, it was messing with our equipment in ways that didn't make sense. Tap, tap. 1,000 feet. The figure's movements grew more frantic now, its free hand searching across the bell's surface like it was hunting for something. A way in, maybe, or a weak spot. I checked our climb speed, still rising but not fast enough. At this rate, we had another 15 minutes before reaching the surface. 15 minutes with this thing clinging to my only way home. Tap. 900 feet. The figure found what it was looking for. Its hand moved to the porthole, pressing against the thick glass with deliberate pressure. Not random tapping anymore, but focused strikes right at the center of the window. Come on. Come on, I muttered, trying to override the ascent system's safety protocols. The bell was designed to rise slowly to prevent decompression sickness, but I'd rather deal with the bends than whatever was trying to break in. Tap, tap, 800 feet. The strikes were getting harder now, more demanding. Through the porthole, I could see the figure's helmet clearly. The visor was completely covered by that dark growth, but somehow, I knew it was staring right at me. Tap. 700 feet. A thin crack appeared in the porthole glass. Shit, shit, shit. I scrambled for the emergency repair kit, pulling out the pressure patches designed for minor hull breaches. But the patches were meant for small holes, not a completely shattered window. Tap, tap. 600 feet. The crack spread across the glass like a spider's web. The figure's strikes were perfectly timed now, hitting the same spot over and over with mechanical precision. It knew exactly how much pressure the glass could take. I could see its face now through the damaged visor, or what was left of it. The features were human but wrong, like they'd been underwater so long they'd started to dissolve. Skin that looked more like kelp, eyes that might have been barnacles. Tap. 500 feet. The whispered voices in my headset were getting clearer as we climbed, and I realized they weren't coming through the radio at all. They were coming from the shape outside, its voice somehow carrying through the water and the hull. "Let me in," it pleaded, the words barely audible but unmistakably human. "Please. So cold. So alone." Tap, tap. 400 feet. The crack spread across half the porthole now. Each hit sent fractures racing through the glass, and I could hear the material starting to groan under the pressure. Tap. 300 feet. I pressed myself against the far wall of the bell, as far from the porthole as I could get. The emergency patch was ready in my hands, but I'd only get one shot to seal the breach before the water pressure equalized and killed me. Tap, tap. 200 feet. The thing's movements turned wild now, its whole body shaking as we climbed toward the surface. The dropping pressure seemed to hurt it. Its strikes against the glass became frantic, chaotic. Tap. 100 feet. The porthole burst inward. Water blasted through the opening like a fire hose, and the figure's arm pushed through right behind it, reaching through the jagged hole with desperate need. Its gloved fingers stretched toward me, trying to grab my helmet, my gear, anything within reach. But something was seriously wrong with its body. As the pressure dropped, the figure started to puff up like a balloon. The old diving suit stretched and bulged as whatever was inside expanded fast. "Help me," it gasped, its voice clear now without the water between us. "Please help." The suit burst. A cloud of rotted matter exploded through the porthole opening. Chunks of flesh and bone and something else. Something that had never been human. The stench slammed into me. Decay and salt water and something chemical that burned my nose. I slapped the emergency patch over the hole, sealing it just as the diving bell broke the surface. Through the remaining intact sections of the porthole, I could see sunlight filtering down through clear blue water. Normal water. Clean water. The kind that didn't whisper or hide unimaginable things in its depths. I was shaking so hard I could barely work the controls, but somehow I managed to signal the surface crew. The bell rocked gently in the swells as the crane lifted it toward the ship's deck. But even as they pulled me up into the sunlight, I could still hear voices calling from way down below. Dozens of them now, maybe hundreds, all begging for someone to come back down and help them escape their underwater prison. Russell's voice was among them. I was sure of it. And they were all still counting. The decompression chamber felt like a metal coffin with windows. I'd been lying in this pressurized tube for what felt like hours, watching Dalton and Emily through the thick glass like I was some kind of lab specimen. The chamber buzzed constantly, a low vibration that made my teeth ache, while it slowly adjusted my body back to surface pressure. Dalton kept leaning close to the communication speaker, his voice crackling through the intercom every few minutes. "Emma, I need you to walk me through what happened down there one more time." "I already told you." My voice sounded weird through the chamber system, tinny and distant. Russell was grabbed by those figures. They tore his equipment apart. The human mind can create very convincing scenarios under pressure stress, Emily interrupted, holding up her tablet like it contained all the answers. At 1,400 feet, nitrogen narcosis combined with the anxiety of poor visibility can produce extremely vivid hallucinations. I stared at her through the porthole. Hallucinations don't leave gear scattered on the ocean floor. "What equipment?" Dalton's voice got sharp. "Our surface monitoring showed normal dive parameters until you activated emergency ascent. That was bullshit and we all knew it. I'd been yelling into my radio about Russell getting attacked, about those figures, about everything. But somehow their monitoring system had missed all of that. The diving suits," I said, "the old company logos, Marcus Chen's gear." Emily and Dalton's eyes met for a beat longer than normal. Emily tapped her tablet screen, then leaned closer to the speaker. "Emma, Marcus Chen transferred to Houston 6 months ago. We have his resignation letter and forwarding address. Then explain his equipment at the bottom of the ocean." "Pressure-induced pattern recognition," Emily said smoothly. "The brain tries to make sense of random shapes by assigning familiar identities. You saw debris and your mind interpreted it as recognizable diving gear. I wanted to hit something, but the chamber was too cramped to even sit up straight." "You're saying I made it all up?" "Not imagined," Dalton corrected. "Experienced, but not accurately perceived. It's a documented medical phenomenon." The way he said it sounded like he'd rehearsed this speech a dozen times. I picked up pieces of their conversations when they thought the intercom was off. Something about containment protocols and previous incidents and keeping things secure. When I asked about it, Emily claimed I was still having hearing problems from the pressure changes, but I knew what I'd heard. Around hour 8, a helicopter landed on the ship's deck. I could hear the rotors through the chamber walls, then voices in the corridor outside. 20 minutes later, A woman I'd never seen before appeared at the observation window. She was maybe 40, professional looking, with the kind of sharp focus that made you feel like she was taking notes on every detail about you. She watched me for a long moment before picking up the communication handset. "Emma, I'm Aubrey Haynes. I'm here to review the incident report." "Company representative?" I asked. Something like that. She pulled out a thick folder and spread papers across the table next to the chamber. "I need to ask you some specific questions about what you observed." Dalton moved closer to her, whispering something I couldn't catch. Aubrey nodded but kept her eyes on me. "The coordinates for your dive site," she said into the handset. 34.2156 north, 119.8945 west. Had you worked that exact location before? "No, I asked about it during briefing, but Dalton said it was classified." Aubrey jotted something down, then turned several pages. "That pipeline you were fixing, how old did the whole system look to you?" "Newer than I expected. Maybe 5 years. Not the decades-old system we were told about." More notes. Emily was watching Aubrey with an expression I couldn't figure out, somewhere between nervous and irritated. "The figures you encountered," Aubrey continued. "You mentioned different diving suits from different companies." "Deepwater Solutions. That company went bankrupt 15 years ago." "Anything else unusual about the equipment?" "I thought about that old suit, the one that looked like it belonged in a museum. Some of the gear was really old, like decades old, but it was all in perfect condition, no damage from pressure or time." Aubrey wrote for several minutes, then looked up at Dalton and Emily. "I'll need to review all dive logs for this site going back 20 years. "That information is classified," Dalton said quickly. "Not anymore." Aubrey pulled out what looked like an official document. "Federal oversight supersedes company classification." The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Emily's tablet nearly slipped from her grip, and Dalton's jaw went tight. "There must be some mistake," Emily said. "This is a routine industrial accident investigation." "Is it?" Aubrey looked back at me through the chamber window. "Emma, in your experience, how many divers has Ocean Tech reported as missing or transferred in the past year?" I tried to remember. "Maybe 6 or 7. People quit, take jobs with other companies." "And how many of those did you personally see leave the company? Goodbye parties, forwarding addresses, that kind of thing?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about Marcus Chen, about the others who had supposedly moved on to better opportunities. None of them. They just stopped showing up. Aubrey nodded like that was exactly what she'd expected to hear. She jotted something down, then got up from the table. "The decompression cycle should be complete in about an hour," she told Dalton. "I'll need to interview Emma privately once she's released." "That's not standard protocol," Dalton protested. "Nothing about this situation is standard." Aubrey gathered her papers and headed for the door. "I'll be reviewing equipment logs until then." After she left, Dalton and Emily huddled together, whispering so quietly I couldn't make out their words even when they forgot to turn off the intercom. But their body language said everything. They were terrified. I lay back in the chamber, listening to the mechanical buzz and thinking about Aubrey's questions. The way she'd asked about missing divers, about the dive site coordinates, about the age of the equipment, as if she already knew the answers and was just double-checking facts, as if she'd been investigating this for months. The pressure gauge showed another hour before I could get out of this metal tube. An hour to think about Russell's panicked voice, about the shapes moving through the dark water, about all the divers who had supposedly quit and left town. An hour to wonder what Aubrey Haynes really knew about what was happening at the bottom of the ocean, and why Dalton and Emily looked like they were about to be caught in a lie they'd been telling for years. I stumbled out of the decompression chamber on wobbly legs, my ears still popping from the pressure changes. Aubrey was waiting in the hallway with her folder, but Dalton and Emily were nowhere to be found. "Where did they go?" I asked, steadying myself against the wall. "Detained for questioning." Aubrey's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather. "Federal agents arrived about an hour ago." That stopped me dead in my tracks. "Federal agents?" "Emma, I need to be completely honest with you." She gestured toward a small conference room down the hall. "I'm not a company representative. I'm an investigator with the National Transportation Safety Board, and I've been tracking this operation for 3 years. My legs felt even more unsteady. NTSB investigates plane crashes. We also investigate industrial accidents involving federal oversight, and this site has been under federal oversight since 1953. The conference room was cramped, just a table and 4 chairs bolted to the floor. Aubrey spread her files across the surface, and I saw photographs of divers I recognized. Marcus Chen's company headshot stared up at me from the top of one stack. 17 missing divers, Aubrey said, pulling out a chart covered in red pins. 20 years, 8 different companies, all working maintenance contracts at specific coordinates. She pointed to a cluster of pins off the California coast. Your dive site is one of 12 locations. I dropped into a chair looking at the photos. These people didn't quit their jobs. No. They were sent to former nuclear waste disposal sites that the military classified in the 50s. Aubrey pulled out a thick document marked with official seals. Operation Deep 6. The Navy dumped radioactive materials in sealed containers at strategic ocean locations, then buried the records. Nuclear waste. The pieces were clicking together in my head, but I didn't want them to. That's why the water was so murky. The containers started failing in the 80s. Radiation leaked into the ecosystem, causing genetic mutations in deep-sea organisms. Aubrey flipped to a page covered in scientific diagrams, but the government couldn't admit to dumping nuclear waste in international waters without causing a diplomatic nightmare. I thought about the figures moving through the water with fluid grace, their bodies built for crushing pressure. So they covered it up. They created a maintenance program. Different diving companies, rotating contracts, all performing routine repairs on infrastructure that was actually containment systems for radioactive materials. Aubrey's finger traced a timeline on her chart. Dalton and Emily have been coordinating the operation for 8 years. And the divers who went down? Aubrey pulled out a medical report that made my stomach turn. The radiation exposure combined with the pressure environment triggers rapid genetic adaptation. The human body changes to survive at depth, but consciousness remains intact. I remembered the desperate voices, the way they'd begged for help. They're still alive down there. In a sense, the transformation allows them to survive without breathing apparatus, but they can't return to surface pressure. They're trapped in a state between human and something else. The room spun around me. Russell. They took Russell. The creatures need fresh genetic material to stabilize their condition. Living humans provide that. Aubrey's voice was gentle but clinical. Your partner was selected as a sacrifice to keep the others contained. I felt sick to my stomach. You're saying they killed Russell to feed those things? I'm telling you that Dalton and Emily knew exactly what would happen when they sent you down there. Aubrey pulled out another file, this one marked with my name. But something went wrong with their plan. She opened my file, showing incident reports I'd never seen before. Diving accidents, equipment failures, People who just vanished, all from sites I'd worked over the past 2 years. "You've been to 3 other contaminated locations," Aubrey said. "Each time you reported unusual conditions that were dismissed as equipment malfunctions or environmental factors." I stared at the reports, remembering jobs where the water had felt off, where my gear had acted up, where I'd sensed something watching me from below. I thought I was just being paranoid. "Your instincts were picking up on radiation signatures and biological anomalies. You were sensing the presence of the transformed divers." Aubrey leaned forward. "That's why you survived when others didn't. Your body was already adapting to recognize the danger. The worry I'd felt before this dive, the bad dreams, the constant checking of my equipment, it hadn't been random fear. It had been my gut trying to warn me." "How many people know about this?" "More than you'd think. The operation involves multiple government agencies, defense contractors, and private companies." Aubrey gathered her papers. "But you're the first witness to return with detailed information about what's actually happening down there." I thought about the figures arranging Russell's equipment in patterns I didn't want to understand. They weren't trying to kill me. No. They were trying to bring you back to join them. The transformation process works better with willing subjects. Aubrey's expression was grim. "But you escaped before the radiation exposure reached critical levels. And now we have enough evidence to shut down the operation and expose the cover-up." She stood up, closing the files. "But Emma, you need to understand something. Those creatures down there, they're still conscious, still suffering. And there are hundreds of them across all the sites." I closed my eyes, hearing Russell's voice mixed with all the others, begging for help that would never come. "What happens to them?" "I don't know. The transformation appears to be irreversible." Aubrey headed for the door. "But at least now we can stop sending more people down to join them." As she left, I sat alone in the conference room, staring at the photos of 17 missing divers. 17 people who had trusted their employers, who had thought they were doing routine maintenance work. 17 souls who were still alive in the crushing darkness, monitoring pressure levels and begging for someone to help them escape their underwater prison. And Russell was going to be the 18th. The ship's captain looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. "You want me to authorize another dive?" Captain Morrison rubbed his weathered face, glancing between me and Aubrey. "After what happened down there." "Not a manned dive," Aubrey clarified, spreading her federal authorization across his desk. "Remote-operated vehicle. We need visual documentation of the site before we can proceed with the investigation." Morrison looked over the paperwork, like it might jump up and attack him. "My insurance doesn't cover federal investigations." "Your insurance definitely doesn't cover knowingly participating in a cover-up operation," Aubrey replied smoothly. "Which is what you've been doing for the past 8 years. That got his attention. Morrison's eyes went wide, then narrowed. "I transport divers. That's all I know about." 17 divers who never came back up, I said. "You never wondered about that?" The captain stayed quiet for a long moment, staring out at the ocean. "I wondered about a lot of things, but wondering doesn't pay for fuel or crew wages." Aubrey pulled out another document. "Federal protection covers whistleblowers who cooperate with ongoing investigations. Your crew gets immunity. Your company gets a clean slate. And if I refuse, then you're an accessory to multiple homicides and violations of international nuclear waste treaties." Aubrey's voice stayed perfectly calm. "Your choice." 20 minutes later, I sat in front of a wall of screens while the crew got the ROV ready. The remote-operated vehicle looked like a metal spider, bristling with cameras and mechanical arms built for deep water salvage work. "You sure you want to do this?" Aubrey asked, settling into the chair next to me. "You don't have to see it again." I tested the ROV's controls, watching the camera feeds blink to life. Russell's down there. His equipment is evidence. Emma. And those other divers. They deserve to have someone witness what happened to them. I started the descent sequence. Besides, I'm the only one who knows what to look for. The ROV sank through clear surface water, its lights slicing through the blue like tiny suns. At 500 feet, the water began turning murky. At 800 feet, it looked like chocolate milk again. "Radiation levels are spiking," one of the crew members called out, monitoring the ROV's sensors. "Whatever's down there is seriously hot." At 1,200 feet, the first shapes showed up on the camera. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered. They were everywhere. Dozens of figures moved across the seafloor with that same strange grace I remembered. Their diving gear from different eras, different companies. Some wore equipment so old it looked like museum pieces. Others had gear I recognized from recent jobs. "Can you get closer?" Aubrey asked, leaning toward the monitors. I guided the ROV toward a group of figures near the pipeline. The camera zoomed in on their helmet visors, and I could make out faces inside. Human faces that had been twisted by whatever the radiation and pressure had done to them. One figure turned toward the camera, and I knew that suit right away. "That's Janet Morrison," I said, reading the name tag. She worked for Deepwater Solutions, disappeared 3 years ago. Janet moved closer to the camera, her gloved hands reaching toward the lens. Through the murky water, I could see her mouth moving, forming words the camera couldn't pick up. "They're trying to communicate," Aubrey observed. More figures gathered around the ROV, their movements quick but not threatening. They pointed toward something in the distance, all motioning in the same direction. "Follow them," I decided. The ROV went deeper, following the group of changed divers. They brought us to a section of the pipeline that had been completely ripped apart, showing the interior structure. Inside the massive pipe, I could see more figures, dozens of them, arranged in organized groups. "It's like a settlement," Aubrey breathed. The creatures had built something down there. Shelters made from salvaged diving equipment, arranged in patterns that showed community, organization. They weren't just mindless monsters, they were still people, trying to create some kind of life in their underwater prison. "There," I said, spotting familiar orange fabric. Russell's suit. The ROV's robotic arm reached toward the shredded diving equipment scattered near the broken pipeline. As I operated the controls, several figures moved closer, watching the recovery with clear intelligence. One of them, wearing gear I'd never seen before, came straight to the camera. Through the helmet's glass, I could see a face that had been human once, now changed for life underwater. The figure placed its gloved hand against the camera lens, and somehow I could hear it. Not through the ROV speakers. The voice came from somewhere else, like it was talking straight into my mind. "Help us," it said. "Please. We remember everything." My hands trembled on the controls. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Aubrey frowned at the audio monitors. "The system's not picking up any sound." But I could hear them all now. Dozens of voices speaking through the water itself. They weren't angry or violent. They were desperate, pleading, still completely human inside their changed bodies. "We can't leave," another voice said. "The water won't let us go." "So cold," whispered a third. "So alone." I finished gathering Russell's gear and brought the ROV back up, but those voices came with us through the water. Even at 1,000 feet, I could still hear them calling. "The evidence is solid," Aubrey said as we watched the ROV break the surface. "This will shut down the entire operation." I stared at the monitors showing the empty ocean surface, but I knew what was still moving in the depths below. "What about them? The people down there?" "I don't know. The transformation appears to be permanent." Aubrey gathered her files. "But at least we can stop it from happening to anyone else." The ship's engines roared awake, and we pulled away from the dive site. I gripped the rail, watching the water fade behind us, but those voices kept drifting on the breeze. They were still down there, still awake, still in agony, still counting. I quit Ocean Tech the following week, turned in my diving certification, sold my equipment, found a job teaching marine safety at a community college. But the ocean had changed for me forever. Sometimes, late at night when the world was quiet, I could still hear them calling through the darkness. Hundreds of voices from 12 different sites, all begging for someone to come back and help them escape their underwater prison. The investigation would continue. Aubrey promised me that. But those people, Russell, Marcus, Janet, all the others, they were still trapped in the crushing depths, transformed into something between human and sea creature, aware of every moment of their endless existence. The ocean kept its secrets well. But now I knew what lived in the deepest, darkest places, where the light never reached. And I knew they were still waiting for someone to bring them home.